You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hello, I'm Gideon Haigh, and you're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Before we get started, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is a well-respected cricket journalist and author. He has written many books on the game of cricket and on other topics outside of cricket. He is currently the senior cricket writer at The Australian and is the co-host of cricket podcasts, etc., with fellow cricket writer Peter Lalor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Gideon Haigh. Gideon, welcome.
Nice to be here, Jack.
Well, thank you, Gideon. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion today, and I hope everyone watching and listening will enjoy it as well. So, Gideon, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I'd like to take them back to when they first got into cricket, and it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they first started in the game of cricket. So let's go back to the very beginning, Gideon, growing up. What are your earliest memories of watching, playing, and even going to the cricket? And who were some of your cricketing idols?
Oh, it's a big question there, Jack. You've opened up on all fronts. I think my earliest recollection of cricket would be looking over my father's shoulder, probably at what was the 1970s, 71 Ashes series, as he watched it on TV in the lounge, and my asking my mother, what's Dad doing? And she replied, "Oh, that's cricket. A lot of people like it, but I think it's boring." I didn't get anything out of a love of cricket from my father, who absconded soon afterwards. But I then independently discovered it when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I think I first came upon it in the sports pages of the newspaper, probably saw a bit of it on television, probably heard a bit on radio. 1974-5 was the first season I played. I played at school. I had a good friend whose father took him to the Boxing Day Test match in 1974. I went with him. That was the first day of Test cricket that I attended. I bought my first cricket book that summer, the 1974-5 Cricketer Annual. I got a copy of Test of Nerves by Frank Tyson from Ian Redpath. Had a column in the Geelong Advertiser where he answered readers' questions, and I was the question he selected to answer, and I got the Frank Tyson book as a result. So had the rudiments of a cricket library, and I think my first player I was kind of fascinated by was Rod Marsh. Funnily enough, because he was left-handed. There weren't too many left-handers around in those days. He was sort of pugnacious, swashbuckling, mustachioed, charismatic. So I always had a bit of a kinship for Rod. The first historical cricketer I became interested in was Victor Trumper, whom I first read about, I think, in there was a piece by Neville Cardis about Trumper in the brochure, the test souvenir for the centenary test in 1977, which I also went to, and I found the way in which he was written about, the romantic way in which he was conjured up to be kind of appealed to my youthful sensibilities, and I became fascinated with him. I always thought I'd like to write a book about him. It took me 40 odd years to do so, but I finally got around to it. Yeah, that's it. I started playing cricket when I was 9 for a club called St James Presbyterian. We were the under-12 Bs. There were no Cs. It was just, participation. But I liked it. And I'm still playing. Still play for the Arrows. I'm 57 now. Not getting any younger, but not getting any worse in a way that's sort of obtrusively noticeable. So very happy to keep playing for as long as they'll have me.
Absolutely. And I guess cricket's one of those sports where you can play on to a certain age, isn't it?
Well, I've got a teammate who's 75. He's an example to me. He didn't take the game up until his early 60s, but he's become a very handy left arm tweaker, and his enthusiasm for the game is at least as great as mine. So I've now got a new role model. You're never too late to get a new role model.
Yeah, that's right. And then you found yourself becoming a journalist and an author, Gideon. You've written many articles and books on the game of cricket, but also outside of cricket as well. So why did you choose to go into journalism and then becoming an author? Talk us about that journey.
Well, I mean, I got to the end of high school and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And journalism looked like something that was kind of interesting, that would keep me going until I made up my mind about a serious career. And, here I am 40 years later, still doing it. I joined the Age out of school as a cadet in 1984. My first job was as a business reporter, not that I had any business acumen or even was mathematically competent, but I just got rotated there as a young cadet. I found it very interesting, so I stuck around. I didn't start writing about cricket until I went to England in 1990 as a stringer for the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald in the business section. And while I was there, I started writing pieces about cricket for Wisden Cricket Monthly, for a fanzine called Johnny Miller 96 Not Out. And I got the idea to write my first cricket book in 1992 about Kerry Packer's World Series cricket, the cricket war. I'd earlier written a business book in 1987 called The Battle for BHP, about a big takeover battle in Australian corporate history. But I thought when I got back to Australia, I'd like to try my hand at writing a cricket book. And it just so happened that, of course, World Series cricket having taken place while I was a boy, 1977 was the year I was in grade 6 at school. I had very vivid memories of it. I knew that it was a crucial juncture in the historical progress of the game. I knew that it had divided a lot of opinion, that a lot of kind of major sort of existential issues came under scrutiny. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit that a generation or so later. And I found it fascinating. It's a great period. It's a period that people keep going back to in the annals of the game, because it's very clear that it anticipated a lot of the issues that are still front of mind where cricket is concerned. The role of television, the purpose of earning corporate profits, private sector investment, the status of the test match, the role of innovation in creating new formats, a lot of the issues that Kerry Packer and his minions first traversed are still things that we haven't argued out yet. They may be argued out in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Any favourite cricket books or books that you've written, and a favourite player that you've interviewed in your time in cricket, Gideon?
Favourite books I've read. I've always liked The Willow Wand by Derek Burley. I liked that kind of bristling kind of controversialist that Burley was. He asked a lot of serious questions about cricket, and in a kind of irreverent fashion, didn't take the game too seriously, didn't take the game at its own account. I like Ramchandra Guha's Corner of a Foreign Field. I think that's a masterful work of cricket history. I think he's a masterful historian. Cricket's been very fortunate that it's attracted Ram's interest. As far as tour books are concerned, probably Alan Ross's book, Australia 55. It's my favourite tour book. I can look across the room and I can see all my books sort of sequentially laid out over there, all my biographies in alphabetical order, all my tour books in chronological order, all my works of literature in alphabetical order, all my Wisdens arranged. There's nothing anal about me, Jack, but I do like to have everything organised. And I think one of my best friends now. A player who I grew up admiring, and a man who I've come to know in subsequent years, and am proud to call a friend, is Mike Atherton, the Times cricket correspondent, and of course, 115 Test matches for England. Terrific man, very generous, very thoughtful, and probably the one person in cricket journalism circles that you absolutely have to read every week.
Absolutely. I do enjoy some of the stuff he says on the game, even commentating as well. It's
terrific
listening to his insights. So, Gideon, what differences have you noticed from your time in the media covering cricket from when you started until now? And how do you see the future of journalism, writing and broadcasting within cricket going forward?
You ask very big questions, Jack. Well, of course, the internet has revolutionised everything about the way in which we do our jobs. When I started writing about cricket in 1990, there were still journalists who carried briefcases around with Wisdoms in them just in case they had to consult a record. Well, of course, everything now is available at a keystroke. Everything has been expedited. There are so many shortcuts available, it's not funny. I think one thing that hasn't changed is the emphasis that cricket journalists puts on Test matches. At least in Australia and in England, we still concentrate an awful lot of our journalistic endeavours on the day's play at the Test match. It's still a kind of a momentous event. I think sometimes we're slightly over-invested in that species of journalism, the daily match report, considering that most people, by the time they've read our reports, will well and truly know exactly what has happened. Sometimes I think cricket journalism over accents the previous day's events and is a little bit oblivious to kind of long-term trends and secular shifts in the game, which is why we're constantly being surprised by the direction in which the game is taking. Whereas, in fact, if you sat back and considered the global forces at work, nothing really about cricket's progress in the last 15 years is all that remarkable. The convergence on a for-profit model is something that you could have foreseen a long way out, considering the general trends of society and economics. What else have I noticed? The players, whereas they used to be relatively approachable, have become more and more sequestered, more and more protected from their journalistic interlocutors. A very simple thing. We very seldom, as journalists these days, find ourselves staying in the same hotels as cricketers. Therefore, the possibility for casual interaction has been removed. They're very extensively policed and quarantined. Their public pronouncements are carefully monitored and neutralised. I think there's, of course, an increasing emphasis on players' individual contracts, their lives as individually contracted persons. Of course, there's no longer one way to advance in the game, is there? It used to be that you played for your club and you played for your state or your county or your province, and then you played for your country. Of course, these days players have many, many different ways to earn a living. I think the love of cricket still abides. I think it's still a fascinating game. If anything, it perhaps has even more layers to penetrate and analyse than it did when I started. A lot of the kind of the inner workings of the game are more palpable. We're more interested in administration and governance than we were when I started, that's for sure. There's a great deal more money at stake. I think it's harder to be independent as a journalist. I think there's a lot of good livings to be earned from the right connections in the game. A lot of people operate with multiple hats. They commentate and they work for franchises and they promote products, and they're individual commercial entities in their own right. I have absolutely no interest in being that person. I am simply interested in playing cricket, writing about cricket, and calling it as I see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that maybe I can do that because I started a little bit further back in time. I do seem to have been around for an awfully long time,
Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah. Any tips would you give to young aspiring journalists, authors, and people who want to get into broadcasting?
Tips. Well, I did it all the wrong way. Of course, I started off by writing books. You're meant to work your way up to books. Books were one of the first things I did. I sort of worked backwards from books into a newspaper career. I didn't really start writing about test match tours on a regular basis until 2001, when I went to England and was the Aussie kind of voice in the Guardian for that series. And I didn't get a job as a columnist, a regular columnist in Australia, until the Australian hired me in 2011. In some ways, it was never really my intention to become that person. That career didn't really. I was interested in books primarily. I wasn't really interested in day-to-day coverage, but inevitably you get sort of sucked into the ravenous maw of the day-to-day coverage of cricket. Tips. Well, I mean, produce something that's unique. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's an awful lot of commodity cricket product these days that looks exactly the same as everything else. Develop a unique set of capabilities, a unique set of understandings, whether that means that you become very well schooled in the history of the game, whether it means that you become very good at analysing data, whether it means that you become very, very good at writing about technique, whether you develop a specialty in studying governance and administration. Do something different. Don't reproduce what is already being mass-produced in vast quantities elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice, Gideon. Now that's talking about yourself a bit, Gideon. Let's get into this cricket discussion. I chose some topics to talk about and discuss. And the first one, Gideon, seeing that the Ashes are coming up next month, which is not far away.
Yeah.
Another Ashes series. We just had the one in Australia a couple of years ago, and now 2023 in England. They seem to come by very quickly these days.
Well,
but let's talk about the Ashes.
Broad's forgotten about that series.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Ashes, Gideon, as I mentioned. Rich history, 141 years since 1882. We all know the one-off test at the Oval, which Australia won by 7 runs, and that started the legend. Fred the Spofford Demon, the fast bowler from Australia, got 14 wickets and bowled Australia to victory. And then the Sporting Times, the mock obituary, the famous words, the body will be cremated and the ashes taken to Australia. And Ivor Bligh, the captain of England, led the team in 1882-83 to Australia and vowed to return to England with the Ashes, and he succeeded. And his wife, Florence Murphy, presented, as we now know as the Ashes urn, to him at Rupertswood, which is just outside of Melbourne, on Christmas Eve in 1882, as a symbol of love and a present, really, because they were in love and they got married soon after in 1884 in February. And the urn was kept on the mantelpiece at his home up until he passed away. And at his request, Florence gave it to the MCC in Lords, where it's been on display, I do believe, since 1927 or somewhere around about there.
I think the first Australian team to actually see it was the 1930 team. She spoke to the team at a lunch, I think, at Lords, and inducted them in the legend. I mean, there's the difference, of course, between the symbolic ashes and the physical ashes. And people have understood that the physical ashes, the symbolic ashes, have been in dispute since 1882, but they haven't had a physical manifestation until, as you say, Lord Darnley died, and that urn became the incarnation of a symbol that already existed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gideon, that goes on to my question. What makes the Ashes so special? Why is it this rivalry captivates us the way it does? Even people who don't watch cricket say, I hope we do well in the Ashes this year. Why is it that this rivalry captivates us the way it does?
Well, I mean, the obvious first answer is continuity. I mean, it's continued uninterrupted since 1882, apart from 2 world wars. There's something about the fact that every modern Ashes, every current Ashes recalls Ashes before. It's not only access to contemporary cricket; it's a convenient aperture on the past. The other thing that's helped it is that it's been relatively even. Both England and Australia have had periods of success. Australia the greater over the duration, but England sufficient to keep them interested. Of course, it involves two peoples with a very great deal in common, but sufficient difference to nourish the narcissism of small differences. So the English and the Australians sort of define themselves in contradistinction to the other. A lot of the things that Australians think about themselves are obtained or accrete by reference to the English, what we're not, what we are and what we're not, and vice versa. So and of course, because we have so much in common, I think it was Robert Menzies who said that we have so much in common that we don't have to be too polite around each other. We can actually be quite rude and be confident that both sides will come back for more.
Yeah, absolutely. He did love his cricket, Robert Menzies.
Yeah.
Big cricket lover, just like John Howard was as well. But let's talk about the Ashes, Gideon. Let's talk about both teams. As we mentioned before, the last series was claimed by Stuart Broad as a void series, he said, and a lot of people didn't agree with that.
Well,
But
I sort of agree with him. Having watched it,
yeah,
having
watched it, he's probably got a point, but I know how some people are. But it was one-sided. But since then, England have changed dramatically as a team under new leadership, Stokes and McCullum, and Australia have gone through some change as well. Now, Australia have held the Ashes since 2017-18, and England, the last time they won the Ashes was in 2015 in England. Yeah. So it's been Australia that's been dominating lately, and also the drawn series of the last series in 2019. But let's talk about Australia first of all, Gideon. They come into this Ashes series with a lack of preparation. That's not a new thing in cricket where you don't play tour matches. The 1948 Invincibles played first-class matches throughout their tour of England and managed to win the Ashes and won everything, basically, because they were the Invincibles. They were great. But whereas these days, teams don't have that amount of preparation. The only preparation they have is the WTC final, which is next month against India. That's it. And you can't really treat that as a warm-up, can you?
No, you can't.
It's a WTC final. Australia haven't won one, and they would like to add that to the trophy cabinet full of World Cups and T20 World Cups that we've won over the years and Ashes as well. But they've already announced the squad. So Cummins, Boland, Carey, Green, Harris, Hazelwood, Head, Inglis, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Lyon, Mitchell Marsh, Murphy, Renshaw, Smith, Stark, and Warner. Now, there's been 11 players who've played in the last series, and Boland, Carey, Green, Inglis, Murphy, Renshaw on their first tour to England this year. As always, Gideon, the squad has created some debate. Whenever a squad's selected, no one agrees with the selectors and they think they've got it all wrong. In terms of some question marks over some players, David Warner being the elephant in the room, Michael Nessa being stiff to miss out after.
Although he's now been added to the squad, hasn't he?
Has he?
Sean Abbott, just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, and a lot of people were arguing about why Michael Nessa was left out and stuff like that.
And
always
Peter
crazy.
Hanscom too, Peter Hanscom. But I think most of all, probably, the one the selection that slightly surprised me was Marcus Harris as I guess the reserve opener in the squad. I mean, he's we've actually seen plenty of Marcus Harris in Test cricket. He's never made 100. I think he's only made a handful of 50s. Certainly over the last 2 years, his record compared to Bancroft is pretty ordinary. If you drill down a little bit further, you'll find that his record on Test match grounds is nothing to write home about. I'm surprised that they've gone back to Harris, who of course was there in 2019 and made no impression, considering how many first-class runs Bancroft's accumulated over the last couple of years. I suspect they feel a certain loyalty to Harris because they towed him round as the spare batsman all of last summer, thereby limiting his opportunities to play any cricket outside of the Test series. But I'm not sure there's that much upside to Harris. I suspect that we've probably seen. I think generally speaking, there's a ceiling for players. I don't think he averages 40 in first-class cricket. He tends to make big runs at the Junction Oval, which is very, very flat. I know he's made runs for Leicestershire, but I'm not sure how significant they are. So I was a bit surprised by that. I don't think there was too much to argue about with the rest of the squad. I think that initially we thought it was probably a couple of fast bowlers short, but by including Nessa and Abbott, they've kind of remedied that situation. There might be a few question marks over Josh Hazlewood, who hasn't been, whose fitness had a bit of a cloud over it over the last couple of years. Ironically, ever since he mastered T20 cricket and became an outstanding T20 bowler, he seems to have had problems with his Test availability. But I mean, other than that, it's a bloody good side, and it's a reason. It's the number one ranked Test team in the world. So I didn't have too many questions about it. I think there are more questions probably going over England. They've played fantastic cricket over the last year since the change of management. Again, not huge change in actual manpower. It's fascinating to see how the change of captain and coach has revolutionised the way in which players approached the game and how easily they were stirred, or how relatively easily they were stirred to playing a completely different brand of cricket. But I guess England needs to explore all the options before they finally settle on the idea of playing audaciously. They need to exhaust the potential for conventional failure before they set out in pursuit of unconventional success.
Absolutely. So who do you think is going to be important for Australia with the bat and with the ball, Gideon? Because up against this England side, you don't know what's a good score because they can be unpredictable. They can score 500 runs in a day like they did against Pakistan at Rawalpindi on a very flat surface.
Yeah, very flat. Very flat.
But it depends on conditions as well. But who do you think is going to be vitally important with the bat for Australia and with the ball in this series, if they are going to have success against England, who are playing some good cricket at the moment?
Well, I mean, Labuschagne's been incredibly reliable since 2019, and he's not made a Test century in England, and I'm sure he's going to set about remedying that this summer. I think I think batsmen who make runs at number 3. It's probably more important that you get runs from your number 3 than basically anyone else in the order, because it's kind of the spinal column of every batting effort. It's why, generally speaking, the best batsman bats at number 3, or the best all-round player. Not sure that Labuschagne would be completely satisfied with what he's done in the last year, although he's maintained consistency. I don't think he's been as outstanding as he was a couple of years ago, but I'm sure he'll look to set that to rights. He already is in county cricket. I'll be interested to see how Travis Head goes. He's reinvented himself completely since 2019, when, of course, he lost his spot. He's become this kind of counter-punching middle-order player who can take the game away from you in an hour. Australia will be hopeful that he can reproduce that form in England, but I think his overseas record is not great, so he needs to step his game up to another level. Cummins had a poor tour of India. Of course, I think there were all sorts of personal considerations where Cummins was concerned. I think it's very difficult to be a fast bowling captain in India, particularly on pitches like the ones that were rolled out by the BCCI. I'm not surprised that Steve Smith actually did a good job as a locum. I think it's a batsman captain country, India, and I did think that Cummins was below par. But over the last 5 or 6 years, day in day out, he's justifiably the world's number one bowler. He's a huge asset, and he has the potential to lead by example. So they're probably the three crucial players. Khawaja, of course, has been the acme of consistency over the last few years. Doesn't have a great record in England, but you have to say he's probably playing the best cricket of his life at the moment. Nathan Lyon's a banker. Mitchell Starc, I think, has more value to offer, just simply because left-handers, seriously fast left-handers are very rare in international cricket. Didn't get a great look in 2019, but I think he should always be in Australia's first 11, just simply because of the variety he introduces to that attack.
Absolutely. Let's talk about England briefly. They haven't announced their squad as yet.
They have actually. They did overnight.
I thought that was only for the Ireland test. I don't think that was for the
Ashes. I think it's a pretty good indication of their thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. With
by the squad that they selected for the one-off test against Ireland, you would think that could be the likely squad for the Ashes next month. But there's such a strong unit when it comes to batting and bowling. Everyone has their own opinions about Bazball. The one who's probably struggled the most is Ben Stokes himself. He hasn't really fired at all. He's only averaging 36 during this run.
36 sounds pretty bloody good to me.
That's not bad, but he hasn't. Some people have said he hasn't been quite at his best. Maybe trying a little bit too hard and probably being over.
Maybe not. Maybe individually, but the example that he sets is so.
It's such a difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
A breath of fresh air. To be positive and bold and
I can remember conservative. John Arlott had this argument that Mike Brearley should be considered an all-rounder, because he bought you reasonable opening batsman, good slip fielder, and a captain. I think Stokes, you can now say, is an all-rounder and include his captaincy as a facility. The correlation between his promotion and England's success is so profound. The player who I think has doubts over his head is Zach Crawley, who looks great when it works, but boy, oh boy, he can be made to look very ordinary by good new ball bowling. And interestingly, they haven't. They're now talking about the potential for Stokes to open the batting. That seems a very strange kind of idea to float. It suggests that they do have some doubts about Crawley's ability to last the series. There's a very good opening batsman out there in Ben Compton, who to me looks like a very good long form player, but he doesn't necessarily fit in with the overall philosophy. I'm kind of disappointed that he didn't get a Guernsey in that squad. I'm also a bit disappointed that they've left Ben Foakes out, who I thought was bloody outstanding. Everything I've seen of Foakes suggests that he's a test quality player. And to simply include Johnny Bairstow at number 7, I don't think you're going to get your best value out of Johnny Bairstow at number 7, are you?
No, he's best suited, towards up the order. Like last summer, he was very productive.
Yeah,
and I think they had Foakes in the side as well last summer as well.
I guess you could say embarrassment of riches, but that's still an embarrassment, and I think that's potentially problematic. The fast bowlers, of course, we know that Jofra Archer won't be featuring this summer. I never really expected him to play any more than one test at best, so perhaps it's best to remove that question straight away. Mark Wood, to me, is very, very important to England. He just takes the game up a notch. And even out here in 2021-22, you could tell that some of the Australian players didn't really like it. Were never completely comfortable.
No, weren't convincing against him at times. No. He bowled well in the last test in Hobart. on that.
Yeah, he bowled fantastically. Yeah.
On
Yeah.
that day
And he's
night.
just a great guy to have around. You know, he's
He
clearly
gives it
just
100%.
yeah. Yep.
You know, every time he bowls, and that's what you need in the team, and that's what England need, that bit of difference with pace. And that's why they tend to struggle in Australia, because they don't have bowlers who can bowl out and out pace, but he can. So they're going to be interesting to watch, but it's going to be exciting. As Stokes and McCullum said, we want to bring people back to Test cricket, make it exciting. That game that they played against New Zealand, when they lost by 1 wicket, was pretty exciting a few months back. So who do you think's going to win, Gideon? Your predictions? If Glenn McGrath was here, he would have said 5-0 to Australia, as always. Who do you think is going to win this series?
Well, I think I never make predictions, and I never will, as they say. There'll be 5 results. Both these teams play result cricket, unless weather intervenes. I mean, you can never be guaranteed that weather won't intervene in at least one, but that'll be the only reason why a game doesn't end up with a positive outcome. I think both teams, interestingly, in 2019, demonstrated a good deal of resilience. You know, they both came back from losing and squared the series up. I think that Stokes has and Australia have both shown an aptitude for coming back from adversity. So I find that encouraging. In previous series, I've sometimes felt that the first test has kind of carried the series, that teams have struggled to recover from early blows, but I don't think that'll be the case this summer. I think obviously it's anyone's game and that it'll be strongly influenced by injuries, but I suspect that Australia will win. I think Australia probably to come out 3-2. Let's say 3-2. And wouldn't that be great if we went to the Oval or Square and Australia both England and Australia had a chance. So let's say 3-2 to Australia. I just think they're a bloody good unit. I think they're well led. I think they're well coached. They'll leave nothing to chance. But, you know, frankly, you can adjust those settings after every test, depending on who's available. And I think over the last 10 years, availabilities have had a huge influence on outcomes. So that's about as much as I'm probably prepared to say on that subject, but I'm very, very much looking forward to it. And frankly, if I knew what was going to happen, I'd feel no need to go.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be an exciting series nonetheless, and going to be some late nights for most Australian fans like myself watching the team go about their business. Let's talk about our next topic, Gideon. Let's talk about the state of international cricket. And there are many problems facing the game internationally. The game's three formats, their future, the international schedule, calendar, and the ICC's governance. So Gideon, how do you see the future of the 3 formats, and your thoughts on the international schedule and calendar? Can that be improved, or is it too late to fix that? It's already gone. And how the ICC have gone about governing the game, in your opinion?
God, how long have you got? Well, the overwhelming factor in everything, it's the biggest advantage and the biggest threat to international cricket is the huge asymmetry that's opened up between India and the rest of the world. You know, the game has never been richer, but it's also never been relatively poorer in various places. That huge problem, which I don't think any other game has in the world, any other sort of international game, where one country is so overwhelmingly economically and administratively powerful, is a huge factor. And the failure of the ICC to do anything to kind of counteract or mitigate that, the general weakness at the centre of cricket governance, is now coming home to roost. You know, there was an opportunity for governance reform at the ICC in 2012. That everyone funked it. Everyone thought that it would be advantageous to themselves to have a weak centre. Everyone thought that that it was advantageous to potentially subvert the system. Well, now they've found out that they failed. They missed their opportunity, and now in this next potential distribution for the next 4 years, that's been foreshadowed that the ICC will vote on in the next month or so, shows that the game's in a pathetic state. That India will end up, when India already so hugely richer than everywhere else, just simply because of the lucrative nature of the IPL, will also rake off the lion's share of proceeds from international cricket, is a massive failure of imagination, and a massive indictment of those in charge.
Yeah. So do you see the future looking grim? Do you think countries will struggle? And do you think that they'll pull out of cricket altogether? Probably.
Well, I think that I don't see any forces around to change that. I think everyone kind of understands the problems, but there's no one around who's actually willing to posit a solution. And the formula that the ICC has arrived at is a prescription for sort of assisted suicide of international cricket. I think we're already seeing that the franchise future of the game being manifest, which raises a whole heap of problems. Because the franchise game is essentially parasitic on international cricket. It is dependent on all those nurseries around the cricket world for developing the players that franchises want to exploit. But franchises don't care a damn for cricket. They're only interested in the profit motive, and the people who are about to own these franchises have no loyalty to the game either. If they weren't investing in cricket, they'd be investing in chopped liver. They'd be investing in another industry. It just so happens that cricket offers lucrative returns. So, I've enjoyed cricket, but I'm not sure that. The game won't look the same when my daughter comes time to savor the game. But look, I've had my time. Maybe I shouldn't mourn too much. Change is inevitable. It's happening at a speed now, rather like AI in some ways, where it doesn't feel like we're in control anymore. It feels as though decisions are being made remotely and inevitably, not according to any kind of strategic thought, but simply for short-term benefits. It's a problem. But,
whenever there's money and that involved, it's always greed and selfishness and not thinking about others and the greater good of the game, and that's what's happening in world cricket at the moment, which is a shame.
Yep.
Let's talk about our next topic, Gideon, the state of Australian cricket. And Australian cricket has presented many challenges over the years. It's encountered many challenges over the years. What happened with Australia in Cape Town, of course, ball tampering, the whole Justin Langer situation, which wasn't handled all that greatly. Domestic cricket is got some problems and issues in terms of the states. Some teams are at higher levels, others are struggling, and that women's cricket.
It was ever thus, Jack. I mean, states have periods of strength and weakness. I guess it's perhaps slightly more problematic that New South Wales has been weak for the last couple of years, because traditionally it's been a great nursery of Australian batsmen, certainly. And of course it's produced Australia's first choice pace attack. But, these things ebb and flow. Not everyone will remain strong forever. In fact, in some ways, it's quite good, certainly where women's cricket is concerned, that New South Wales is no longer hegemonic. It's great to see the WNCL and the women's BBL being shared around. that's actually what you want. I actually used to think it was a problem that New South Wales was so dominant. I'm sort of in some ways glad that phenomenon has gone the way of in exactly the same way as it should. So, I mean, look, the problems for Australian cricket are, I think, perhaps more at grassroots level than I mean, elite cricket there will always be 11 good players to represent Australia. Where we get them from will be interesting. Cricket faces a number of threats to its popularity from alternatives. I think in some ways that the club cricket around which I grew up has changed unrecognisably in my time in the game. In some ways for the better. I think it's a more inclusive and a more open game. I think it's a more creative game. It actually has to work harder in order to attract people, and that's no bad thing. But access to the game is a problem, I think, for everyone involved. Cities are growing in crazy madcap ways where not everyone has equal access to recreational facilities. Cricket's struggling to keep pace with the changing demographics of Australia. I think every sport is. I think as far as the international calendar is concerned, there is a dismay in the public about the fact that it changes every summer. It's something I hear regularly from readers. They no sooner make plans for one summer than the next summer is completely different. I think cricket has historically been quite a conservative game. It's relied on a pretty conservative fan base, and traditional fans now feel as though they're being taken for granted and even neglected by the cricket authorities. That's a shame, but we can also succumb to that idea that the past was always great, and we used to have everything that we wanted. We've always found reasons to complain about cricket, and I'm kind of old enough to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess many people have their own opinions and won't be happy with certain things about, how come we don't get this test match or, for an international tour, because the fixture was released a few days ago. And some people talked about that, Adelaide not happy about, having a day test rather than day-nighter, and that's going to be played at the Gabba.
I'm more amazed that there isn't more consternation about the fact that we're getting the West Indies again.
But to me, to be honest, I'm not really. I'm always excited for cricket, to be honest, because I'm a cricket lover and tragic. But next summer to me doesn't feel much as exciting, or something like that to me, really, because we just played the West Indies last summer. And they're struggling, as we know, and they used to be a force in cricket, obviously, back in their dominant eras and days. And then Pakistan is a team that's a bit hit or miss. You never know what you're going to get with Pakistan.
Always
and you think Australia should win both Test series next summer. You would think that because they're far stronger and better. But it's just the way the calendar is, really, the international schedule and how the ICC
well,
do the Future Tours program.
Going back to what we discussed earlier, Jack, which is the acute inequality between countries now. I mean, the West Indies always traditionally punched above its weight in international cricket. I mean, it's a tiny area, small economies, geographically isolated, problematic time zone for broadcasting into India, high cost base because of the necessity to fly between islands, relatively small audiences. So it was amazing, frankly, what West Indies cricket was able to accomplish in the 70s, 80s and 90s. In some ways, it's probably reverted to roughly where it should be, relatively speaking. But there is something just awfully sad and lamentable about its sorry state, and frankly, that poor governance, lack of strategic thought, is principally to blame for that. and Australia is complicit in that neglect. So in some ways, we're getting exactly what we deserve.
Yes, it is a very sorry state to see countries struggle, and who once were powerhouses of cricket like the West Indies. You know, everyone talks about the West Indies of the 70s and 80s and how they won everything and never lost a series for a very long time, and then they started to decline. And last summer, you could just sort of predict what the results were going to be when Australia played those two Test matches against it, and probably the same against South Africa as well.
Yeah.
You know, they struggled as well, and they lost a couple of tests by an innings. I think they lost, a couple of tests by an innings, and then Sydney got washed out.
And of course, by now South Africa's barely playing. You know, they've got two
yes,
tests for the next 4 years.
They're not really playing any Test cricket for the next 4 years, which is how you're going to improve as a Test side if you don't play.
Basically, we are destroying every single Test country apart from the big three, and that's just deplorable and completely foreseeable.
Yes, and you know, many countries don't play 4 or 5 game Test series anymore. They either play 3 or 2 because they don't earn much money.
I want to watch a 5 Test series with the West Indies. But we've helped make them dreadful.
Yes, it's just the ICC, the administrators, and that probably not thinking about the greater interests of the game and just sort of neglecting the game, really, because we're grateful.
It was never part of their mission to think about the game. They were representatives of their countries. They weren't representatives of the game. There's something fundamentally amiss about the governance model, where directors of the ICC simply turn up and assess themselves according to the spoils that they're able to deliver to their own constituency. It's a colossal fiduciary failing. We should have had an independent board for the ICC 10 years ago. But as it is, we've just ended up with a job lot of political hacks and parochial nobodies. And like I said, we're getting what we deserve.
Yes, but let's hope that the game can be here for many years to come, Gideon, for our children and their children to enjoy.
Well,
like we
some
have.
form of it will be, Jack, and my form of it will be, and the form of cricket that I play will still be here. It will change. It will change more slowly because we don't have the external economic forces that are constantly bearing on us. And no one wants to buy the Yarras and turn us into a for-profit entity. We're playing because we love it, and that's the best reason to play it, frankly. I think most players play it now because they do love it and they happen to get paid for it as well. But we have no other impetus. We have no other. There's nothing else shaping the decisions that we make. If we don't want to play, we don't have to. So that's a good way to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we can't get worked up over anything that we can't control, really. We can't control how the ICC go about their business.
No, I don't know, Jack. I'm fucking furious.
As fans, we should be furious about, because governing bodies are meant to do what's right for the game and to make sure it develops all around the world and in different countries, of course. And cricket is growing in different countries, like the USA. They're doing Major League Cricket and wanting to expand that. And but when there's money and there's all that other stuff.
The great problem for the fan is, of course, that the only way that you have of expressing your indignation is by not watching the game. And that's a form of self-penalty. So really, you're stuck with the status quo and a worsening status quo, frankly.
Yeah. So Gideon, I thought to end our discussion today, I've enjoyed it immensely. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot along the way. And I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Cool.
I know you're a little bit angry about the ICC there, but hopefully you've got that frustration out.
What are they there for? Just to get pissed off with?
I thought to end our discussion today, Gideon, I asked our listeners to send in some questions to you to answer.
Sure.
About cricket, and they want to get your thoughts on that. So we've got a few people who've sent in questions. Thank you to everyone who sent in their questions. Our first one is from the Stats Man. and this was on Instagram, Gideon. He says,
Right.
what is your take on the BBL draft, and will it improve the cricket economics of Australia? Thank you for your question there, Statsman. What are your thoughts on that, Gideon?
No, it won't. There we go. Next question.
It
was a hopeless failure last year, wasn't it? It was just ridiculous.
Yeah, I covered the draft on our podcast for a live stream, and a lot of people were saying it's not. Afterwards, they said it was a total flop. It didn't really do much.
Pathetic Me Too isn't from cricket. Oh, football's got a draft. We've got to have a draft too.
Yeah, well, I can understand the BBL doing that because they'll never have an auction. No other T20 franchise league besides the IPL will have an auction because they don't have that amount of money. And Cricket Australia is not owned by private owners or investors. BBL's Cricket Australia own the BBL and not other parties. So, well, they've made some changes to it for next season. So see if that could improve it, but it wasn't really a success last season when they did it for the first time. Raj has sent in 3 questions for you, Gideon. So it's a 3-parter. He sent 3 questions for you, 3 individual questions, I should say. So the first one is, he says, you talked about dynasty teams of West Indies and Australia and how India were on the verge to do it just as Australia was about to do it again after the ball tampering incident. That we are due a dynasty team. It just somehow doesn't happen. Under Curly, India had a great chance and could be even considered a dynasty team for a short while, but they lost to South Africa and had a good chance of winning in England. But because of their IPL greed, didn't play the last test till a year later and lost the match there, thus drawing the series. And again, we are entering the late 2000s, early 2010 stage where every team was beating every other team at home and just losing away, with the sport being more competitive between the top 3, at least in test nations, and nations like South Africa, Sri Lanka, and New Zealand on the decline. Can we even hope to get a dynasty team again? So your thoughts on that, Gideon?
Well, I guess I would say, do we actually want a dynastic team? I didn't enjoy cricket all that much when it was only Australia who was winning. I got a bit bored with it, frankly. I actually like the idea of cricket success being shared around. I suspect we're on the cusp of seeing a hegemonic team, India, which will, certainly India's preferences will shape international cricket and who can play against them and maximise their opportunities to make money off the back of that. So perhaps it'll be a commercially dominant team rather than an on-field dominant team, because who knows what can happen when 11 men play 11 men. There is that inherent unknowability. Even India, for all its wealth and glamour, can be beaten. It's harder and harder to be a dynastic team because, of course, you have to stretch your players over all the formats. What constitutes a dynasty these days? Is it being World Test Championship, World Cup holder for ODIs and T20s, being atop the rankings there, and really only 3 teams in the world have even the possibility of attaining that status, and I think it probably would at best be temporary. So, okay, there's my answer. We don't want a dynastic team; it'll be boring, and it's actually what constitutes a dynastic team anyway?
Yeah. His second question, Gideon, is the political element.
Yeah, go on.
The second question he asked is the political element of boards have been in the news more than ever in our history of the game, where even the common cricket fan is able to recognise the behind-the-scenes people. Is that making them take decisions that are conservative? For X, not questioning about a player's questionable behaviours on field, or when they have an actual proof, just abandon them completely like Warner, or prepare pitches so they don't lose at home like Pakistan.
Was that political in Australia's case? I didn't think. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull had some remarks to make, but I think we do have a freestanding cricket bureaucracy in Australia. I don't think our decisions are politically shaded. Having said that, the sight of Albo and Modi on their little motorised shoe going around Modi Stadium was not for the weak-stomached. I didn't like Australia participating in what was obviously a party political rally for the BJP. I thought that was actually pretty disgraceful of Australia. I don't think Albo was called out on it sufficiently. I mean, I think the BCCI is an obvious case. It's an arm of the BJP these days. It's thanks to family ties and to political contrivances. I mean, every institution in India is being politicised by the Modi government, and I think it's high time that cricket blew the whistle on that, but they won't because of self-interest. It's actually one of the things that concerns me very much about this ICC distribution. So I have absolutely no idea what the BCCI need this money for, and I have absolutely no surety that it will go to the deserving or necessitous parts of the Indian cricket economy. We have an awful lot of money in cricket these days. We're overly obsessed with where it comes from and insufficiently interested in where it's going.
Yeah. The third question, this is the last one for Raj in this marathon of questions here. He says, how does one maintain the balance between playing in domestic tournaments and international T20 leagues if the player wants to be an all-round cricketer and not just focus on one format? Does the demand of of today's cricket, I should say, make you quit other formats? If yes, can anything done about players in this manner?
No. Money is a huge determinant for players. I think there is increasingly an attitude, or players are encouraged in the belief that life is long and careers are short, and you best make hay while the sun shines. So I think this next generation of players coming through who cannot remember a period before franchise T20 will tend naturally to slip into the idea of profit maximising where their cricket's concerned. And frankly, why not? That's all administrators do. In some ways, the players are simply emulating the administrators.
We have another question here, Gideon, from Jihan, a regular listener of the podcast. And this was via our YouTube channel. He says, with the rapid expansion of T20 franchise leagues all over the world, in particular with the ones in South Africa, the UAE, and the USA, closely tied to IPL franchises and investors. Firstly, do you think this spells an end to international cricket being the pinnacle, and in particular ODI cricket and the World Cup, which to me as a fan, I still think is the premier tournament in world cricket? And then he goes on to say, how do you think the potential of players being contracted by T20 franchises rather than international boards will affect this? And if there is the potential for all these premier T20 tournaments leading to an increase in match fixing and betting scandals and potentially predetermined results in some way similar to WWE wrestling? Thank you, Jihan, for your question. Gideon, your thoughts there?
Apart from the last bit of the question, Jihan, I think you've answered it yourself. I think these are very, very real threats, and we probably will see them unfold in the next 2 to 3 years. I think it's a little bit like W.G. Sebald said about the bombing of Germany during the Second World War. Once the bombers were on the tarmac, it was inevitable that they would be launched and bomb German cities. There's the money around, there's the capability around. There are insufficient countervailing forces. I see the game unfolding pretty much the way that you anticipate. I mean, I suspect international cricket will persist for as long as it offers an opportunity for India to excel. India likes cricket that it can win. The World Cup will continue to be relevant if India is a power in it. I mean, we have India hosting, of course, in 2023. So opportunity for them to win. People will say, oh, the World Cup, it's really, really significant. But if India stopped being interested in ODI cricket, it would pretty soon ebb in importance. And I think there are signs that, bilateral series for ODIs are waning in significance around the rest of the world. And this IPL has been absolutely amazing. Coming off the back of the Test series, the Border Gavaskar Trophy, which was I felt rather disappointing, rather abrupt. I thought pitches were poor. I thought the general quality of the cricket was pretty lackluster. I thought the crowds were pretty indifferent. To see the IPL, people roll into the IPL and it to rate and attend so colossally was an indication of the relative degree of interest of the Indian cricket fan. And frankly, as the Indian cricket fan goes, so the rest of the world follows.
Yeah, thank you for your question there, Gian. I hope Gideon answered it to
Sorry to give you such a pressing answer.
to the best of his ability. We have another question from Alex. This is from our YouTube channel. This is a two-part question. So his first question is, do you think it's a good idea to scrap T20 international cricket for test playing nations? And his other question is, do you think that there is a prospect of the IPL becoming something like the NBA of cricket, having a monopoly on the best players for a significant part of the year, whilst other leagues will be seen as places to showcase one's talent for the IPL?
Well, T20 is the fastest growing and most commercially lucrative property round. I don't think international cricket should be deprived of that potential. I can understand why you might think about dispensing with bilateral T20 series to tidy up cricket's calendar, but why should international cricket have to sacrifice something for the sake of franchise T20 cricket? I enjoy T20 internationals. I enjoy seeing the best players play T20. It's great fun. The worst T20 is the T20 that's played between ordinary players, where it just looks like chaotic crap. But the best T20, when it's played by first choice international sides, is great. The World T20 that we had in Australia last summer had some of the most memorable T20 games that I can recall. So, and I can't recall all that many of them, frankly. So I don't think there's an argument for that. I understand the arguments both ways. Frankly, if I had my druthers, there would be fewer franchise T20 tournaments around the world. I think most of them are a bit pointless. I don't think they're producing particularly high quality cricket. There's an element of Me Tooism. There's a sense that, we have to have one. But I think, New Zealand has kind of got it sort of right as far as T20 is concerned. It's just fun. Their domestic T20. They don't take it all that seriously. They haven't allowed it to cannibalise the rest of the game. I think sometimes we over-egg T20. We put too many eggs in the T20 basket. So maybe that's the area that has to give. I think there's cricket fans these days are absolutely spoiled for choice. They get more days of cricket. It's more accessible and arguably more democratic than it's ever been before. But I don't think the appetite for cricket has grown considerably. I think in some ways cricket is cannibalising its own market. I think people, given the choice between attending a day of Test cricket or a bilateral ODI in Australia and a night at the T20 in the BBL for the kids, they're probably going to take the latter, aren't they? It's like the choice between a home cooked meal and a night at McDonald's. I don't blame people for taking that choice if it's offered to them, and I don't think there's too much we can do about complaining about that.
No, and I think by having three formats, it gives you that choice to watch any form of cricket you want.
Yeah.
some people, it's their personal preference. Would you choose to play watch a test match or a T20? Most people would say, "I'll watch a test match because I grew up on that. It's the oldest form of the game. T20 cricket's just a bit of fun, nothing too serious. It doesn't really matter if you win or lose in T20, but in a test match it does. So I guess it's up to people's personal choice and preferences. But I do know a couple.
I want to see good cricket, Jack, and I'm happy to take it in whatever form it comes. A boring day of Test cricket is still a boring day, and a good T20 match is better than that, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to your personal preference, really, that many people have. But just thinking about when T20 first started, Gideon, India were dead against participating in the first ever T20 World Cup.
Ironic indeed. Yeah,
because the only reason they were they took part was because the hosting rights for the 2011 World Cup were being negotiated at the time. Because I listened to it on this audiobook about T20 cricket that I was listening to recently, and they talked about that. And then the following year, the IPL was created after they won the T20 World Cup in 2007.
Well, the IPL was already on the slipway at the time that India won that tournament. But you're right. The victory, 2 victories over Pakistan in the T20 World Cup in 2007 do give a huge impetus to the IPL. Indians love a form of the game in which other Indians succeed. It makes sense.
Yes, it does. And our final question.
I've got a hot date at the National Archives, so let's make this the last question.
Yeah, this is the last question anyway, Gideon, from Terrell, from our Twitter page. And he says, what are your thoughts on the 2024 to 27 ICC revenue, which I think you've already answered a little bit there, Gideon.
Yeah, I have already
your thoughts on that?
They're baleful, let's just say, and pessimistic.
I think that's a good answer to finish off on. Thank you, Gideon, for joining me today. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but I do appreciate you sticking around and having a chat with me today. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I'm sure everyone listening and watching have enjoyed listening to you and learned a little bit about yourself, your cricket journey, how you got into journalism, becoming an author, and your thoughts on the game as well. Gideon, where can people get access, I should say, to your cricket podcast, etc., etc.?
Oh, actually, that's pretty cricket, etc. I think you can just look it up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well. We're not doing it at the moment because Pete's on holidays in Ireland, although we're chatting from time to time. I had a chat to him last night. We'll be podcasting regularly during the Ashes series. We're both looking forward to that. We're both looking forward to the Ashes series. They don't. I think partly because 2021-22 was so bad. That's kind of as bad an Ashes series as I can remember, as lackluster and devoid of drama and uncertainty but hope springs eternal every time a new Ashes begins. So we're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So we'll leave a link to those in the description of this episode for people to check out. Any final words, Gideon, that you want to say before we sign off?
It's a great game. It's the best game. The best advertisement for cricket is cricket itself. I think it's a player's game. I think those who play it have a different relationship to those who merely watch it. I think that's one of the reasons why I have maintained my love for the game, because I've continued to play it. I have a hit every Sunday with my mates, and there's no better game for companionship. There's no better game for shared frustration. There's no better game for united jubilation. It gives you a tremendous amount in common with anyone that you meet who happens to share a love of cricket. You've automatically got this huge interest to share and enthusiast. It's a great bridge builder. It's a great memory creator. It's a great aperture through which to view your society and through which to view the past. It's provided me with a lifetime's amusement and diversion and compulsion and fascination, and I'm enormously grateful to it.
I couldn't agree more, Gideon. It is such a wonderful game, cricket. And there are so many people who are passionate about this great game, including myself. And that's why I do the podcast, to try and get the message and get people over to cricket, because it's a great sport. Even playing it, umpiring myself, you get so much fun out of it. And I've always said, Gideon, that the game doesn't owe us anything, but we owe the game a lot.
Absolutely.
Because it's given us so much.
Yeah.
And we should be grateful that we have cricket this day. Even though it has its problems, it's not a perfect game, as we've discussed. Many problems that the game faces around the world. But, we should be grateful, we should be lucky that we can go and play club cricket on a Saturday or Sunday with our mates, go to the nets, a bit of banter, you talk a little bit of rubbish, but you have fun. And we shouldn't take that for granted. We should be grateful for that. And as I mentioned, it's not a perfect game, but it's a great game that you can just pick up a set of stumps, play wherever you are in the world, and just play cricket. And it's a wonderful game.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Gideon, for joining me today. And for everyone listening or watching this cricket discussion, I hope you learned more about Gideon, about him, and on the game of cricket as well. Once again, Gideon, thank you so much for giving up your time, for joining me today. And for everyone, thank you for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.